what roads to be followed. I am Irina Castro. I'll be one of the moderators. I'm an ENSSER board member, and I'm here today co-moderating with my friend.
Hey, Frank Pertner. You already saw me this morning. Thanks.
This debate will be divided into two parts. In the first part, we will have a conversation oriented by the moderators with all those panel members.
We will later open up the open discussion with the audience.
But before we begin, I would like to briefly present all the panel members. First, I would like to present the esteemed Professor George Chrousos, physician, scientist, pioneer, pediatric endocrinologist, and stress-related disorder expert, and a UNESCO chair on adolescent healthcare.
Then we have Dr. Petras Varelidis, chemical engineer and public official, currently serving as the Secretary General for Natural Environment and Water at the Hellenic Ministry of Environment and Energy.
Also in our panel is Dr. Edward Henry, National Ecolagist at the U.S. Department of Agriculture Natural Resources Conservation Service, with a vast experience in collaborating with stakeholders to implement science-based conservation strategies. And Dr. Aude Lapprand, General Delegate of the French Association, Citoyennes, Citoyennes, which is an association that aims to foster participatory research, democratizing science, and advocating for citizen science.
And then we have a few people who already made contributions to the conference. First of all, Andrea Beste. Over here, agricultural scientist and soil expert with an extensive experience in advising members of the European Parliament and various other state parliaments. And we have Dr. John Ioannidis, who you just heard talking before, professor of medicine at Stanford University with pioneering work in meta-science, amongst other things.
And of course, to close this panel, our esteemed friend, Angelica Hilbeck, that we already introduced through these days.
Thank you very much to you all for accepting our invitation to be here today with us and having this great round of perspectives for the roads to be followed. Unfortunately, Professor David Guy will not be able to join us today on our panel due to unforeseen circumstances. Yet we like to highlight his valuable contributions to bridging the gap between science and policy. Hopefully, he will be able to join the discussion online, as of course we encourage him to intervene, provided the circumstances permit.
So, amid the multiple crises we are currently facing, particularly the environmental crisis, scholars and activists in the field of political ecology and environmental psychology have been working to develop the concept of eco-grief. The eco-grief means the emotional distress, sadness, and mourning that people experience in response to environmental degradation, climate change, and the loss of the ecosystems and species. Considering this frame, my first question goes to Professor George Chrousos. So, in light of your extensive and pioneering work on biology of stress and its links to chronic diseases, how might we understand this growing phenomena of eco-grief within a framework of stress physiology? And given the psychophysiological impacts of such a collective experience, what are the implications for public policy, particular to the responses to the health and ecological crisis? Or in other words, how do you believe governments should respond to the emotional and physical tools of this ecological crisis on our populations?
Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you for this wonderful long question that requires a long answer. Professor Nicolopoulou-Stamati asked me to say a few words about stress, the basics. So it's going to take me about 10-15 minutes, and then we will be able to discuss this better. Right now, our societies have primarily chronic psycho-socioeconomic, techno-ecologic, and climatic stress. We all know what stress means. It's become fashionable in the past few years. When I started working in this area, I couldn't mention it. because there was no real scientific definition for it. Anyway, the story is very old. It started here in Greece, or rather in Magna Graecia in Italy, when Pythagoras suggested that the universe is in a certain equilibrium, balance, which we call it harmony. And this complex system would be disturbed on one side, but would have adaptive powers, forces to bring back balance. His student, Alcmaeon, from Croton, suggested that the human beings are also complex systems, and they are between stressors, which can be physical or emotional, and an adaptive response. And of course, there is a range within which we have this balance, which he called isonomia, a term that lasted only for about 3 centuries. Then Hippocrates brought back the concept and called it eucrasia. You know, eucrasia, dyscrasia, idiosyncrasy, because at the time they believed in the theory of the humors. The best definition was given by Epicurus, who called it eustathia or eustasis. And it took 2,300 years for Walter Cannon, a famous American physiologist, to call it homeostasis. So it's all Greek words. And the best definition, as I told you, is the Epicurean definition, which is the balanced state of the flesh and the soul. So he included both the mind and the body. So stress is the state of threatened, or in us that have some self-awareness, perceived as threatened homeostasis. Now, the second important law was the law of Mesotis of Aristotle, which also pertains to all complex systems. What did Aristotle say? He said, the good is in the middle between two evils, too much or too little. And here is the Aristotelian curve, the inverse U. In the middle, we have eustasis, deficiency on this side or allostasis or kakostasis, and excess on this side, which is allostasis or kakostasis again. Now, stress is not always bad. And if it occurs right in the middle range, it's okay. And sometimes it's even pleasant. And we have not only distress, but eustress, good stress. All right, what's good stress? There is a human property, a tension to control our environment. This has been called by American psychologists affectance, not effectiveness, affectance, this tension to control the environment. If we succeed, we have pleasure, like if you make your breakfast, for example. You get pleasure out of it. Now, this corresponds to hormesis in pharmacology. Learning is affectance. If you learn something new, you get pleasure out of it. And by philosopher Spinoza, it was called conatus. And there is a journal, a philosophical journal called Conatus. Finally, you must have seen autistic children that make these repetitive motions and so forth. This is how they express their affectance. This way they feel alive by doing this. Anyway, this is the most important slide of this lecture. Stress is supposed to be acute, not chronic. We have the so-called fight, flight, or freeze reaction, which is stereotypical. It's inside our brain. Every time a stressor exceeds a certain level, this system is activated. It's called the stress system. And it goes up, activated, then it goes back, and everything is fine, usually. There is only one occasion where acute stress can cause major problems. That's PTSD. You see something extremely stressful, about 20% of humans have a certain vulnerability to it, and they may develop this syndrome. So, fight, flight, freeze is physiologic. For us humans, we also have another reaction called fawn reaction, which means to be nice to your enemy, right? Now, what's pathologic is the so-called chronic psycho-socio-economic stress nowadays. And I add ecological stress and climate stress right there. So in this case, we have chronically activated fight, flight, freeze, and fawn reaction, which means fight means anger and violence. Flight means fear and anxiety. Freezing means despair, paralysis, and phones means subservience. So chronic, any of these situations, if it's chronic, it's bad for us. And many people nowadays will go through this kind of responses. So stress is anything that would stimulate the stress system once, and each one of us has a different threshold. But anyway, we have daily hassles, life transitions. Early life is very important. We have natural and unnatural catastrophes, wars, climate change, which I have here, starvation, of course, which is a major stressor, socioeconomic status, poverty, minority status, loneliness, work stress, unemployment, job loss, downsizing, loss of control, social inequality, social restriction, all of these are stressful. We have also addictions, toxic substances, and here we have environmental pollution as well, techno-ecological stress. Chronic disease, of course, they can be stressful. Treatments, think of chemotherapy, quite stressful. All inflammations, if they exceed a certain time, we have the so-called parainflammation of stress. Whenever we stress, as you'll see, we also increase our inflammation, which is not good for us. It's bad for us. That's why we don't call it inflammation, we call it para-inflammation. Then we have psychiatric disorders, anxiety, depression, personality disorders, phobias, sleep deficiency, nowadays, very important, uncoupling of the clock. We have regular jet lag, social jet lag, work jet lag, behavioral addictions. We have digital technology has produced a lot of stress. We have the so-called metamodern stress, which is the bombardment by information, which we enjoy because dopamine goes up. Cyborg stress, which is dependence on our screens. The hikikomori syndrome described in Japan, it's adolescents that don't leave home, they stay on the internet constantly. Eventually they have to take them to the hospital. NEET is a new syndrome described in America. Young people say no education, employment, or training. That's NEET. And finally, the new term nomophobia, which is wrong in Greek because you don't have fear of laws. You have fear of forgetting your mobile phone. It's no mobile phobia. You forget at home and you have to go back and pick it up. Anyway, we think that we're in a good health homeostasis. Something disturbs homeostasis. As I said, usually we'll go back where we were before. However, there are two other situations. One is the stress may become chronic, or we have developed PTSD. We are in cacostasis. We survive, but at the damaging our tissues and not feeling well, being dysphoric. And then there is another situation of improved homeostasis where you do everything right, you exercise, you eat well, and so forth, and you are in a better shape to deal with stress. And here we have the so-called psychosomatic resilience. If we reach up here, that means every time we're stressed, we have a small disturbance and a quick recovery, and we all strive for this. The ancient people had it. It was ataraxia of the soul and aponia of the body. It's exactly the same thing, psychosomatic resilience. So resilience is the ability of any organism to resist to stressors and return rapidly to homeostasis. Nowadays, we know a lot about how our brain has developed, the human brain. And I won't spend time on it, but I'll just tell you, stress is a brain phenomenon. That's where it all happens. And here is a beautiful book. It was published in, I think, 2012, which is called The 10-Year Explosion. What did they notice? There is acceleration of human genetic evolution as a function of cultural evolution, because our culture moves so rapidly, we have to adapt. And now we have a great difficulty in adapting. And in fact, it seems that there is a virtuous cycle between human genetic evolution and our culture. And here is what these authors published in PNAS. This is the number of polymorphisms going up or mutations as you can see the acceleration, in other words, here. Okay, this is genetic change. And the red is Africans. The white is European, the blue is Europeans. The Africans are a little older, about 2,000 to 3,000 years, because we all came from Africa, modern humans. Now, the brain is not one organ, it's many organs that communicate with each other. We call them neuronal networks. And what you see here is the so-called connectivity. There is inter-network connectivity and intra-network connectivity. I'll tell you why I'm saying this. Here is the stress system, which is in the lower part of the brain. It's very ancient. It's been around for 300 million years. And it's the HPA axis with cortisol and the arousal system with norepinephrine, the locus coeruleus, and the centers of the autonomic nervous system. The end hormones are not only cortisol, but norepinephrine, epinephrine, immune CRH, with the same CRH produced in the hypothalamus, and interleukin-6, which is an inflammatory cytokine that causes somnolence and fatigue. So it goes up second to make us relax after an acute stress. And we found now that the brain, the amygdala, where the fight or flight reaction is, works with CRH, just as the hypothalamus. And immune CRH degranulates mast cells in our blood, in our tissues, so it causes a local inflammation. So let me go back to the brain. What you see here lighting up is the so-called default mode network. This is the network of our self-awareness and our self-biography. Okay. When we have stress, what happens? We have activation of the stress system and the so-called salience network, which is the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the Isles of Ryle. And when that happens, that suppresses the default mode network. We think less of ourselves and has two effects on the executive network. The first is inhibition for 200 milliseconds, all subconscious, where the strategy is decided, fight, flight, freeze, fawn. And then in 30 milliseconds, we have the activation and we act, we do something. Now, the second important system is the reward system or the hedonic system. Dopamine goes up, we feel well. Goes down, we feel punished, we feel bad. So here's the center, the VTA, that produces dopamine. It sends dopamine to the nucleus accumbens and a large part of the prefrontal lobe. And actually, a lot of it goes to the so-called ethical part of the prefrontal lobe, which is in the inner area. And that's where we have the so-called empathy, right? And that's what gives us the feeling of prosociality and right or wrong. Now, a second important slide that one needs to remember is this. Whenever the stress system is acutely activated, it stimulates dopamine because we need to do something about it. However, after about 2 weeks, in most people, if you're activated for about 2 weeks, then it goes the other way. It inhibits dopamine secretion. So it causes the chronic stress-induced dysphoria. And a lot of people have it. Another thing that people don't think is the circadian system that we have. Our metabolism, our brain activity, everything has a circadian pattern, okay? And that's regulated by light, which we have abolished, basically, because now we have artificial light, okay? So what happens? We found that 20 years ago. The biological clock, which is about 7 genes that have the molecular 24-hour rhythm, interacts with the glucocorticoid receptor directly and has acetyltransferase activity and acetylates it. So in the morning hours, we are resistant to cortisol. Cortisol doesn't hurt us. In contrast, in the evening hours, when the receptor is unacetylated, then our tissues are very sensitive. So let me tell you what happens. Normally, our cortisol goes up at 5 a.m. It reaches a peak at the time when we wake up, then goes down to undetectable in the evening, and then goes up again the next day. What happens to stressed people, chronically stressed, depressed, and so forth? It's flattened. It's not that it goes up in the morning. Actually, it took us 10 years to realize that. It goes up in the evening when the tissues are sensitive to glucocorticoids. So if this is cortisol, you see here, this is glucocorticoid receptor acetylation. This is the sensitivity of tissues to glucocorticoid. You see in the evening and early night hours. This is chronic stress, and this is jet lag, shift. All the jet lag situations I told you. So in any of these cases, you have functional glucocorticoid hypersensitivity, and you develop slowly, gradually, in a very long time, Cushing syndrome. That's what chronic stress, especially in young people, is. Now, if you have chronic stress because of the high cortisol and the high interleukin-6, and other cytokines are produced by the visceral fat because it's collected there gradually. Cortisol, that's what it does. It increases visceral fat. You have psychological, chronic psychological diseases, anxiety, depression, addiction, antisocial behavior, psychosomatic disorders, loss of libido, fatigue, and pain. You have somatic diseases, loss of weight for a few days for some people when they're stressed. The majority put on weight when they're chronically stressed for various reasons. We develop obesity, metabolic syndrome. We have smoldering inflammation, parainflammation, immune dysfunction, autoimmunity and allergy, hypofertility, atherosclerosis, cardiovascular disease, and all the way to dementia. We develop osteopenia and osteoporosis, and premature aging of the entire organism, actually. Finally, we have increased vulnerability to certain cancers. At this time, over 20 cancers we have increased vulnerability to them because of chronic stress. And not to forget, on top of these chronic non-communicable diseases, we also have some communicable diseases that stress makes us vulnerable to. Think of the upper respiratory infections, coronaviruses, tuberculosis, and leprosy, which are not problems anymore. And here is what happens. As I said, everything is in the brain according to our genetic variation, developmental history, very important, childhood, embryonic, fetal time. According to how much stress we're exposed to, it can be real or just perceived. According to our nutrition and aging, we develop all of these hormonal changes. Cortisol stimulates gluconeogenesis. Glucose stimulates insulin. Cortisol plus insulin increase visceral fat. Cortisol and the catecholamines and IL-6 cause sarcopenia. We lose muscle mass. We develop the metabolic syndrome. Those who have the genes for diabetes develop diabetes mellitus type 2. For hypertension, they develop hypertension. We have endothelial dysfunction and inflammation because we have increased, as I said, inflammatory cytokines, atherosclerosis and cardiovascular disease, and women who are prone to develop polycystic ovaries for genetic reasons develop PCOS. Okay, and this is our body mass index and the levels of IL-6 and TNF-alpha. It's the visceral fat that secretes these hormones. So I'm finishing with this slide. I calculated the time well. Because of chronic psycho-socioeconomic stress, techno-ecological stress, and climatic stress, we increase stress system activity and inflammatory activity, and we develop the so-called chronic stress and inflammation syndrome, the CSI syndrome, which has psychological and physical manifestations and causes, in my opinion, all the chronic non-communicable diseases. I don't have time to go over each one of them, plus some communicable diseases. On top of that, we have sleep disorders, accelerated aging, increased cancer risk, and increased risk for infections. And we also have a lot of subclinical infections, which are stressful, and environmental toxins, which also are stressful. So what happened nowadays? We develop obesity, overweight, and this syndrome. It's all epigenetic. It's not genetic. 3 generations are not enough. So you need to know that environmental stressors, and these are here, but we don't have time to go, have influenced our species and our genotype, but at the same time, they influence the individual, our ontogeny. In other words, our epigenotype. And we end up with our phenotype. It's the same stressful stimuli that influence the species and influence the individual. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor George Chrousos. This is actually, it's a very interesting approach to a social phenomena that we haven't yet had the opportunity to discuss here today, but it also reveals how sometimes simple questions can result in very complex and answers. So having this in mind, I would also like to ask, and having in mind this, the complexity that exists in the answers that science gives, I would like to ask Dr. Petros Varelidis, as General Secretary of Ministry of the Environment, you must often turn to science for guidance, but given that science is frequently uncertain, plural, contested, and as we've seen, complex, how do you manage the policy process, and what kind of roles do you expect scientists to play, considered just what we've just seen?
There's no doubt that it's a complex word, but it's also, simple. Depends on the angle that you see, and there's no doubt that we are biochemical computers. And I mean, if there was a single doubt, now we are convinced by your presentation. But in complex chaotic systems, there is a simple law that explains the phenomena. To put things into perspective, and that's the second law of thermodynamics that says that things go from bad to worse. So the entropy of the system is increasing. So you need to put more and more effort in order to keep things in order and improve things. It's not only the negative aspect of the second law of thermodynamics, but it's a fact that you need to know. So science and politics. If you look through time, you will see that science and all political decisions nowadays involve and are connected to knowledge and science much more than they used to be in the past. None of us, no one of us is happy with the degree that this connection exists. Should and could be more, but things are getting better. I remember about maybe 30, 40 years ago, I had a politician that later became president of the Greek Republic that used to say, there is smoke in Athens, bring me a dead. Bring me a dead. Who died from smoke? Okay, so this is a preposterous statement. It was a public statement by the minister, who then became president of the Hellenic Republic. that shows how much progress we have done since then. So things do get better and science is much more involved. Of course, in politics, in order, and in everything in life, in order to be convincing, you need to be able to tell a story. And that's a problem because sometimes the politicians, that they understand very well that in order to be convincing, you need to be able to tell a story. They forget the objective and they focus to the story. They focus in being convincing. So they get small bits and parts of science in order to build the story, and they lose the overall picture. It's a difficult. It's not so easy always to find the right balance between the different pressures and science and reality, because in politics maybe the truth is what it is, but you need to see also what is feasible given the social climates that exist. That it's not always easy. However, the more educated the politicians are overall, both in the government and in the other parties, because also the other parties have a role in democracy and they influence political decisions more than you know, actually, more than you know. We are more sensitive to what is in the public debate, what the ideas in the public debate, that you would think so. So the better educated those people are, the better the decisions are. And in the global context, there is this strange fight about is there climate change or not? For example, a politically heated debate in a quite straightforward scientific issue. However, the global community has this body which is IPPC, Intergovernmental Panel, that tries to also be used as a tool to find an average position. And of course, you're going to say, but science and reality is open to an average interpretation. Yeah, the answer is yes. Science is not exact. Mathematics is an exact science. That's why I have great respect for mathematicians. But most of the other sciences, including medical science, is by far not exact. And this is the reality. And social science or economic science is not exact. Economic science is not exact at all. So we need to listen to different scientific opinions. We need to be able to have the right feeling of the society, because sometimes the right decisions are far ahead of what the society can stand, and maybe a good decision, a correct decision, can backfire. So this is an aspect that we always need to remember. But overall, we need to be optimistic. Every government in Greece, at least, every government in Greece, also because of the bankruptcy that we had 10 years ago, 15 years ago, actually, the exact 17 years ago, the bankruptcy happened in 2008. We realized in 2010, but that's when it happened. Because of that, every government tries to use data and knowledge and science more and more in the decisions in order to avoid the next, the next bankruptcy in reality, because that's always the fear. And in order, of course, to make things better. But in political decisions, science and knowledge is one of the parameters. There, unfortunately, we like it or not, there are other parameters as the different interests, small or big, that revolve around every issue. There are interests. We're talking about renewables. Okay, so there are interests in the oil industry. There are interests in the wind turbine industry. There are interests in photovoltaic interests. So you have economic interests vested around every subject. So you have science, knowledge, economic interest, social perception, and you need to find the right balance in order to be able to implement the solutions that you propose. Because if you go far beyond what the society can accept, you may have the right decision, but you cannot implement it. In democracies, you need to have the society on board. Otherwise, we pass laws, we pass regulations, and they're not implemented. We're good in not implementing regulations in Greece. So we have to sometimes go on a slower pace, follow less science and knowledge in order to be able to drag society towards the right direction. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for this, I think, very valuable perspective that was also missing so far a bit at the conference. So thanks very much for this. I'd like to ask next Edward Henry, based on your experience, how should national agencies approach competing scientific knowledges and expectations that also were hinted to by the last participant from both science and the public?
Sure, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's been a wonderful conference so far. I've met a lot of great people, heard a lot of great ideas. And really to address that question, one of the things that I think is most important is to think about where people stand often depends on where they sit. So in other words, the person, the scientist, the organization that comes to you is often an important part of the equation that we in government need to consider when looking at scientific evidence. And throughout my career and my observations and working with different areas of science and perspectives shows through in many different ways. And one of the ways that stands out that we have to think about in government is the difference between the people who come to you with inductive reasoning and science versus deductive reasoning and science. So for example, we will have folks come to us and talk about the overall yield of a crop or a big picture problem. And then they will bring in the science that says, here is what we think needs to happen. Here is the position that we want you, the government, to support, or this is the funding that we would like to see. But that is often very different at a large scale when you're looking at, say, the anoxic zones in the New York City harbor area or in the Great Lakes versus what's going on at a field level, an inductive level for how those problems are happening. So it's really important for us to think about that difference between the deductive, the big picture, and the inductive, the small picture. Another thing that's really important, I think, to look at is the time factor of the science that's involved. How often do we have an interest group or a group of people who come to us and they say, we want you to support this because we want to try this approach to improving a resource or to having an outcome among the population. But when you look at the science, and it may show that improvement, grades may improve, yields may improve, who knows, the examples are infinite. But the difference may be what happens over time. Because just because you've improved the yield over 1 year, or you've gotten more animals, more crops, more whatever, well, what happens in that same field, in that same system 10 years from now? So we have to look at science through, again, a wider eye than just the people who are often coming to us. And I think that's another important factor that we need to look at. Another thing that's really important is to really look at the group that's bringing it to us. Sometimes if you have an industry group that's coming to you, they may want to see one perspective, but it can be a very different perspective if you have a conservation group on the other side who may be discussing the same issue. And we run into examples with that, for example, with the use of pesticides and the protection of pollinator habitat. At this conference, for example, we talked about some of the loss rates that were occurring in colonies because of pesticides. And I saw numbers like 7% and 10% come up. Well, in the United States, we often have 30 and 40 and 50% loss of colonies. And we look at things like, for example, varroa mites and their role in the loss of colonies. But you have different perspectives from the pesticide companies that may talk about how their chemicals do or do not affect that resource versus the beekeeping community that will come and say, well, it's okay, but we're losing profit, or we're not able to pollinate the almonds throughout the country because we don't have enough colonies. So we need more money and support or science to produce more nukes, more colonies, the center of the colonies that will create more to come out. So we have to balance and look at all of those factors. It's not just always the person in the room. Sometimes it's the people who aren't in the room that we need to look at as well. And then we also need to look at the time of the science itself. I don't know how many times somebody will come and they'll bring a paper that's 20 years old. But there may be a paper that's 5 years old that provides better information or sometimes even worse information. So a lot of times when science is brought to us, we have to have a skeptical eye and a big picture perspective on those scientific questions so that we can really see what's going on to try to make the best decisions possible. And certainly, again, at this conference, I've heard a lot of times about how we use a consensus model in Europe. And in the United States, we try to get consensus as well. But oftentimes, the government needs to serve as an arbiter and needs to make an ultimate decision to move forward because time is of the essence. And so there is a difference in terms of trying to figure out how do we help all the people who are in the room, those who aren't in the room, and move forward in a time constraint that we are provided. So being able to identify the science that is being presented to you, but also identify the science that, if it's available, that isn't being presented to you, can be really important in trying to bring all of those things together. So again, I kind of wrap it all up by saying that we have to look at the perspectives of the different people who are around the table, those who aren't around the table, and to keep in mind that the information that we're getting is often just one perspective among many that we have to try to balance to try to do the greatest good for the most people as most often as we can. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Edward. I think some of the things that you just said brings me to a question that has not been yet posed here in this panel. Most of the approaches we have here have been related to how science relates to policy and to the decision-making, but science is also a product of policy and decision-making. And so for that reason, I would like to ask Dr. Aude if she could tell us how important is to involve citizens in shaping public policy, particularly science policy, and how can this participation be meaningfully structured beyond token consultations that actually ensures that there's a democratic engagement that plays as a substantive role alongside the scientific expertise? You want to come here? You can talk from there, or you want to come here? Ah, okay, so come here.
I'm sorry, my English is very poor, so I have some notes, so it will be hidden there. You will not see my notes. Good morning. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak today. So you said before, I represent Citoyennes, that is a French NGO that was set up in 2002 with the aim of promoting the democratic elaboration of scientific and technological choices. To this end, Sciences Citoyennes is putting forward proposal for action in different areas. We want to reorient scientific public policy, to make research and expertise more accountable. We try to produce critical analysis of technosciences and to support what we call a third scientific sector. That means a sector where the producer of knowledge are not from the private or from the public sector. So in order to do that, in order to be able to organize public debates on public policies, Sciences Citoyennes has been active observer of the preparation phases of the European framework of research. That will be the main subject of my speech just now. As you may know, the current framework program for research, that is FP9, that is called Horizon Europe, it will end in 2027. Around 100 billion of euro have been allocated to this program, and that represents the fourth budget in the European Union. The future program, that will be the FP10, the 10th program, is currently being prepared. What we have been seen so far are the following. First, the main guidelines emerging for the future program of research relate to security, defense, and competitiveness. Even if the European Parliament calls for a dedicated framework program of research, it seems that the future program of research will be swallowed in a very new, a big one, competitiveness fund. The second thing that we are seeing till now, that there is no transparency nor democracy in this preparation phase. The Commission, the European Commission, had set up a high-level group to carry out the midterm review of the previous program, the current one, Horizon Europe, and also to make recommendations for the future one. If you look at the composition of this high-level group, it reflects exactly the dominant science in the European strategy. That is to say, the members are specialized in numeric and business-oriented science. Moreover, and unlike what happened in the previous program, there is no or hardly any political statement about the need of citizen involvement in the agenda setting of the program. That was the case before Horizon Europe. There had been a lot of political statement about that, but now for this program, there is no need anymore of citizen, it seems. So competitiveness, security, defense, those words appear more than 20 times in the very recent resolution of the European Parliament that had been adopted last week. In this resolution, the Parliament highlights that the green and the digital transition are inextricably linked to the competitiveness. So that it is exactly the twin transition Larissa mentioned 2 days ago. That means that what is important for the European Parliament is this green and digital transition. So in comparison, in this resolution, the word citizen appear only 7 times. So according to this narrative, it seems therefore impossible either for the European Commission or for the European Parliament to consider that the private interest of the industry are not the same as the public interest, or even detrimental to them. It seems impossible to them to consider that research could be dedicated to cooperation and not competitiveness. It seems impossible to consider that another society could be imagined without the imperative of the economic growth. And it seems impossible to consider that citizen participation could be organized in the research agenda setting. As I said before, in the previous program, Horizon Europe, there have been missions oriented research that have been set up, and they were supposed to respond to this democratic blind spot, that is the need of citizen involvement. That's for missions have been created. In reality, the 5 missions that have been created organized some few consultations with citizens, and this, as we said, to engage with citizens to boost societal uptake of new solutions and approaches. So that is always the same story. Citizens are being asked to accept changes at the very end of the research process, but the choice of the mission here has been made without any debate. It results, in my opinion, in some highly questionable choices, especially, for example, one of the missions set the objective of adapting the climate change. Others might have proposed to work not on adaptation, but on climate change mitigation. Another mission aims to achieve 100 climate neutral and smart city by 2030. Are really the smart city the choice of the citizen? If I take the example of the Climate Citizen Convention that have been held in France in 2020, it appears that there is no mention to smart city in the 149 proposals that have been made by this citizen convention to reduce greenhouse gas emission. So for these highly political choices that are the formulation of the mission, Sciences Citoyennes has advocated appropriate democratic procedures. During Horizon Europe preparation, we proposed with other European NGOs that citizen convention could be used to co-create the FP9 missions. As a reminder, citizen convention is a participatory process that have been designed especially to involve citizens in political decision making in research and innovation issues. It includes 3 phases. First one, the training, during which a randomly selected group of citizens study the relevant topics. The second step is a dialogue with experts, during which the citizens question each other, and also they can question a pool of experts on the various topics. And the third step is to make some joint conclusion where the citizens reach either a consensus, or if they cannot achieve a consensus, they elaborate a main position that also take into account minor positions. So during the Horizon Europe preparation, we argue that a citizen convention is a democratic mechanism that helps institutions to make choices and take decisions relevant for the greater public good. That is a democratic mechanism that also where each point of view of the different stakeholders is taken into consideration during this dialogue step. It is exactly a reference to what you mentioned before, that this process can allow to have different point of view that can be exposed to the citizen. And this plurality of expertise will help to address what is, in our opinion, a very complex challenge, that is the technical innovation. And finally, we argue that this type of procedure, where citizens are really in the sitting seat, they can allow that citizens could not be reduced to be passive receiver of information that we can give them, but they are active in the elaboration of the recommendation. So what happens now in 2025? We are now working again with a new coalition of NGO. We try to join our forces and to be able to influence the future program, the FP10. We made last month a joint statement in order to protest against the dissolution of the research program into a big competitiveness fund. We also claim for an open and participatory framework through a citizen convention that will define the strategic priorities of the program and also the societal challenges to be addressed in the future program, as well as the future missions, if the mission are still there in the future program. To be meaningful, the citizen convention needs some guarantee, and we propose to make the recommendation of the Citizen Convention to be mandatory on at least 10% of the research budget. And finally, what we propose for the future program is a fourth pillar. Today there is two pillars in Horizon Europe: excellence, societal challenges for competitiveness and innovation. So we proposed a fourth one called Citizen Science for Societal Challenges that will support participatory research projects. And our recommendation will be that the evaluation criteria and the juries for this evaluation of projects should be specific to this pillar in order to take into account that participatory research has a specific nature because it is research that is carried out by researchers and civil society working together. Even if the political context is not favorable at all to this proposal, we feel as Citoyennes that is very important to write them loud and clear to make another voice heard. Our hope is to maybe wake up the academic community by saying that there is an alternative to what is proposed today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Aude, for this crucial perspective. And I think, yeah, so the democratization of science and involving citizens is a key issue, I think, that should concern us all and that could remedy for some of the problems we discussed at the conference so far as well. I'd like to ask Andrea Beste, who we already heard yesterday talk a bit, discuss with Diederik at the stage about her experiences as a scientific advisor on the EU level. What sort of remedies or proposals for improvement of this scientific advice and politics relation would you see based on your experience, but not maybe also in reaction to what other people said so far in this round?
Do you hear me? Okay. So I think my everyday work is very far from that what we have been discussing today here the last days. So I'm a freelancer, so that first, okay? So that's totally another situation as if I would be a scientist of a university or something like that. And I have two roles. Just give an example on European level. I'm also consulting companies. I have worked 7 years for Unilever in soil management and so on. But I'm also advising deputies, and I'm advising also the European Commission. And the European Commission, there I'm sitting in an expert group with some other experts, or I'm sitting in 3 expert groups, but one example is the expert group for organic farming. And there we are sitting in a permanent group, and we have subgroups for special issues. I am in the permanent group and in 4 subgroups. And there we discuss with other experts from science, and we are all scientists or come from science. So we get an application from one member state. Can we use this additive in food processing? Or can we use this fertilizer in organic farming? And then we are discussing that in a subgroup for fertilizers or for food processing, and then the subgroup is discussing it. And every member of this subgroup makes a declaration of interest. And if he has conflicting interests, he can discuss, but he has no vote. So this is maybe what we discussed yesterday, a wishful situation. It should be and many more situations this way. So and then we get a conclusion in the permanent group, and then we make a recommendation, and everything is written down in reports which are published. Our committee meetings are not public, but the reports are public, and how the discussion is documented, and then we recommend something to the Commission, and the Commission then can follow our recommendation or not, because the Commission has to bring into what we discussed here with you both, the other stakeholders also on this form. But we decide, is this kind of fertilizer or is this kind of additive in line with the principles of the organic regulation? So we have a really clear question that we have to solve. That's not so complicated. So that's, I think many can follow that. My other role is that there are deputies on regional or national or European level who say, okay, can you make consulting for me? Can you work as a consultant for me? Because deputy have assistants, and the assistants mostly coming also from science. They are, in most cases, they have studied the issue what the deputy is dealing with, but they are totally overloaded, especially if you have deputies from smaller political groups, because these deputies have to deal every day with 300 different issues. So, and their assistants are not really prepared for every issue they deal with. And so, and then I am engaged because I have now more than 25 years experience in the area of agropolicy, of farm policy, farm management, soil management, also in some parts of food processing and so on. And I can then make briefings, or I can make a little research about research knowledge. So that's the second step. And what we consultants, what we are appreciating is that we get that time today. We have many well-organized NGOs on European and national level. And I would say they do in most questions I'm dealing with, they do the risk research on some techniques, not the public research. I think that should not be that way. I think that's not really the solution for our problems. But in many cases of techniques which are discussed today, maybe carbon farming or CRISPR or something like that, the engagement of NGOs and the research capacity of NGOs, we could not work without them. And my role very often is, if I don't have enough experience to assess some studies, to make some briefings, to write fact sheets, my role is to bring together the deputies, sometimes also in, if we have conferences in the European Parliament. I have been in the darkness in very many situations. I have been the one who recommend Ricardo or Larissa. they don't know that, but I have been the recommender for many of these conferences where they were invited. And I'm bringing together researchers, good experts from NGOs, which I would say are near to be researched, but maybe are not accepted in the former publications of research. And I bring them together. I do networking, but I do also assessment. So I look on recommendations from other persons. Does this person is able to bring a complex facts and complex research to the niveau of deputies? If that's not the fact, you can invite whomever you want, that will not have an effect. So that is also some kind of assessment to look if we have people that can explain, that can bring down the very complex niveau of research on the niveau that deputies are not stupid. They just are not they are not experts in every issue they have to deal with. They are representatives of the whole society. So you have to be able to explain the things so that they can understand what should be their role to, I would say, to decide in common sense, to decide for the whole society, to decide for sustainability. So they have to be able to decide that then. And I am supporting the assistants to get enough knowledge to bring it to the deputy so that he can decide himself, because he is the representative. And I cannot say to him what he has to decide. I can explain, so this decision would have that effect or that impact, and that decision, the other decision, would have another impact. So I have also to take into account, even me, the stakeholder interests from the stakeholders who are involved in this decision. So maybe call me translator or shortener of studies or something like that. I think that is, and the most time that is the role of the work I'm doing. Maybe you can imagine a bit better now.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Andrea. I think all the contributions until now have revealed how complex is the relationship between decision-making, knowledge-making. We've seen that in terms of emergency, it's not just rational knowledge that acts. We also seen how physiological responses are triggered in emergencies times that can lead to decisions that can lead to wrong decisions, but also how difficult it is to negotiate, not just what happens in your body, but what happens in the society. And we've seen that, well, not even the experts have a straightforward answer. They have to deal with this complexity. They have to deal with a lot of contradictions. And some of these contradictions may be, as Aude had proposed, kind of be a little bit solved by increasing participation, democratization. But as Professor Petras also highlighted, decision at the level of the state is also really complicated, because sometimes you have to make decisions that you will not have the support of the majority, or when you're dealing in institutions such as Edward has shown us, you have to deal with very different interests within very framed and structured organizations of the states. So sometimes all this complexity leads to people not believing in science, scientific credibility, or discredibility of the decision process. So my question next is to Professor John Ioannidis, which is a huge question for you, and has to be this: how can, taking all that has already been said, how can we move forward in a way that rebuilds trust in scientific institutions and in scientific inquiry, particularly when we have all dissenting voices, sometimes suppressed, discredit voices. What kinds of reforms, cultural shifts, institutional safeguards do you believe that are necessary to make this scientific debate and the relationship between science and decision open, rigorous, and plural?
That's a very tough question, and I'm not sure that I have answers that are supported with high level of evidence. Obviously, we're not running randomized trials to randomize who's going to be the prime minister of a country, or not even who's going to be the leader of a guideline. So most of that is observational evidence, and what we have seen in evolution of studies on trust of science. We've seen a dramatic decrease in trust of science in many countries, including the United States very prominently over a number of years. And that obviously creates a tension about using science or even invoking science in anything that we try to do. In the past, saying that, well, this is what scientists have to say was something that was taken seriously, or probably with not much resistance by the vast majority of the population. Now it is seen even as suspect. Scientists, who are they? Why are they having so much intrusion in my life, and they're shaping what I have to live or do or be exposed to or not be exposed to? So I think that we need more transparency. I think this is something that might help. Being able to communicate clearly who is doing what, where they come from, if there's any conflicts of interest, being very complete about disclosures. When it comes to decision making, try to avoid conflicts as much as possible. If they cannot completely be avoided, at a minimum, they should be fully disclosed and hopefully balanced. And that's a very difficult act, and this is why I say we should try to really avoid them as much as possible. Second level is try to keep the scientific process separate in terms of the generation of the evidence from the policy, let alone political side of the process. There's a very nice paper in Nature, Human Behavior, showing that when Nature, the leading scientific journal, made a political endorsement in a presidential election, that led to a very sharp decline in trust by 50% of the population, who eventually voted on the other side of what Nature was endorsing. And unfortunately, several journals have taken very politicized stances at time. At the same time, it doesn't mean that science should shy away from issues that are in the mix of social and political debate. But I think that it should be done in a way that evidence is generated in a way that we can convince people that we did it in the most objective way. We acknowledge that it's not easy to do science. We did our best. We did our best to diminish biases. We did our best to avoid influences that may shape the agenda and the guidance and the conclusion of the results. And here it is. Here's what we got. Now someone needs to make a decision. Hopefully this is a democratic process. As I showed in my presentation, unfortunately, democracy is not doing very well. Only about 8% of the global population is living in full democracies, according to the Economist, and maybe another 12% in flawed democracies, and then it just goes downhill. So we should try to, at a minimum, protect science from influences that may taint its objectivity or its perception of objectivity. I do believe in encouraging dialogue and debate. There can be a tension on what is the boundary. Do you encourage, for example, dialogue, kind of equal distance with anti-vax perspectives? I would say no. But it has to be very careful. One has to be very careful to make sure that there's no perception that science or its agents or policy makers who are using science are trying to silence people who have different perspectives or different viewpoints. Try to use evidence, try to use data, try to use information in a as objective a way as possible. I do worry that science is becoming increasingly politicized. I think this is a major problem, and I think that it creates a background situation where any stakeholder who wants to weaponize that, they can do it right away, and with less and less resistance in doing this. And I think that this can happen, unfortunately, in any country, even in countries with strong democratic traditions. Sometimes there may be good intentions in the background, trying to save lives or trying to help society or improve quality of life or improve the environment. Sometimes these agendas may be hijacked by political forces. And I do worry that science is only damaged when that happens. Even if the intentions are good intentions and even when the proposals are not necessarily off and they may have some scientific support, we need to keep the independence of science separate from whatever leaders would want to do. At least that's what I think.
Okay, thank you very much. Considering all that has been said during the last days and based on your experience, Angelika, you have said the final statement here, and also based on your work in advising supranational institutions at times, how would you think about accountability when it comes to science-informed policy? How should people, scientists as well, be held accountable on these issues?
Yeah, thank you very much. I've been listening to all the inputs and statements here. It clearly presents itself as a wicked problem we're dealing with, and where all stakeholders have their share to carry and had their role to play to make the situation as wicked as it is right now. I subscribe a lot of what has been said, but I would like to call also on the responsibility of the sciences. When you're saying it's been politicized and instrumentalized by political forces, but that is almost to be expected. That's what political forces do, so that shouldn't come as a surprise. What sometimes comes as a surprise is how easily scientists allow this instrumentalization or make themselves or offer themselves to be that. I've seen that quite a bit, specifically during pandemic times or when times are in emergency times, because they are people and they are scared or they have strong views and they feel they should be superseding now a healthy kind of distance they should still keep, and they take sides and become partisan actors in the process. So they also have to, so we cannot only say, oh, science, first of all, there is no science as a monolithic block. There's many scientists and many different perspectives. And we do have within the sciences those groups and segments that try to overrule and make their views dominant. And that's been a constant struggle. And in order to make it dominant, they are happy to side with politicians who need them to cover for their political and partisan agenda. So that's what makes it so really wicked to sort these things and then say, okay, we should be doing this and you should be doing that and others should be doing that. What I've found interesting to hear also from politicians is, and what you've been saying, politicians are busy and they are foremost lay people in what they do. They all have small areas of expertise. You're an engineer, you're an expert there, but in everything else, you're not. And that applies to everybody else. But that recognition of, okay, I'm only an expert in a small thing and everything else is I'm a lay person, requires that you make sure, and that would be a bit of a question I would like to point back also to you. How do you make sure, or do you even bother, an honest answer if possible, to get a plurality of voices into your deputies, politicians, decision makers arena? Or do you filter it already or censor it to only bring forward those positions and pick those voices that support what you know clearly is your political view? The same goes to you. You're in government, she's advising governments or in changing roles. Sometimes they're governing, sometimes they're not. And we need to have these processes all opened up and be transparent as well, so that it is clear this is the kind of expertise that comes here, so that people cannot get up and say, oh, the science says this, I'm right. And if somebody comes and disagrees, it's like, oh, you're rogue scientist, we don't need to listen to you. You understand what I'm trying to get at? The diversity and plurality that we've been calling for here throughout the last 2 days, how can you operationalize that? How can it become good practice or part of a set of good practices that you include diverging views, plurality of views, diversity of scientific perspectives based on evidence? I'm not talking about esoterics. I'm not talking about, fantasies, based with minimum, evidence. There's a factual basis to it. You should be listening to. And it includes people who don't share your view. Is it possible, and how can we get this, and how can we train and educate politicians if they don't have time to listen? How do you do this? Do you talk to politicians even, or is that a waste of time from the beginning? You rather talk to their advisors or to their assistants, or who do you talk to as scientists, especially if, critical scientists, where you want to bring critical expertise to the table? So I'm reflecting this back as a question to how we can operationalize plurality and have good practices, set of practices for decision makers.
Okay, thank you very much, Angelica, for bringing this up. Does anybody want to react directly, briefly to that? Yeah, sure.
Fortunately, in most cases, when it comes to political decisions, the scientific questions behind any issue, the answers are there and are simple, because we deal with the surface. I mean, we don't go in depth or in questions that still are debatable at scientific level. And of course, even that, I mentioned the example of climate change, okay? So there is a minority that believes that climate change is a naturally induced phenomenon. Fine. What I use when we discuss the decisions that we're going to make, my main argument is not about saving the planet, because at the end of the day, who cares? It may sound shocking, but that's a reality for the average citizen. We'll all be dead, by whenever the planet is going to have a problem, and the planet doesn't have any, it's not a legal entity or an entity. I mean, so yeah. But we go to the political decisions that are coming because of climate change policy, for example. Do we want electric cars or we want diesel cars? Electric cars have an obvious positive effect on the air pollution in the city. So that's something that everybody understands. Everybody understands it's better, especially in Greece. Everybody understands because we used to have heavy air pollution in Athens. So it's something that is catchy to the public. So that's something that you can use, and it's not debatable. So you need to use the right arguments. As I said, you need to have a story to tell. If my minister does not get it, because that's the big question. What I do, and I guess what we do, we try to engage prominent scientists into the debate in order to validate what we're trying to explain. For example, we call Professor Zerefos, I don't know if he was, to explain to the minister that, this and that. Okay, so you need to pull the right strings, okay, and that is also maybe combined with letters from some NGOs or letters from some associations. So it's an art, I would say, where you try to engage society, scientists, economic interests, in order to go for the right decision. And you know that it's the right decision because it's something that should have been done years ago and it's still pending. 99% of the things that need to be done, they should have been done 20 or 30 years ago. So from a scientific point of view, it's a solved issue. And the other issues that are not solved, because when we go to the EU level, you have decisions that are taken at the EU level for the good of the environment, for example. Let's say this fertilizer is banned, okay? But then in that case, what we need to look at is, okay, we don't question that it's bad for the environment, but we need to see how bad is bad, because bad is not, good and bad, black and white. How bad is bad? How much does this cost? How much money I'm gonna lose as a country? And that same money I could have used them to improve hospitals. So that is what political decision is about. You need to balance different, things that you can do with the money that you have. So sometimes EU decisions are good for the EU as a whole, but maybe it's not good for Greece, because maybe the cost for Greece is disproportional. And what is the cost for France or from Germany? The cost for France and Germany is never disproportional, I can guarantee you that.
So maybe we could see if other panel members want to briefly also answer to some of the challenges posed by Angelica, and then we will move to the audience, because I'm pretty sure there's a lot of also questions, but we only have 15 minutes left. So please, I will ask you to be challenged by Angelica.
Yeah, so I could say I'm the filter and I do only what I want, and I recommend the deputy and he has to follow. So that would be a simple way. I make policy in the darkness. So not, but the first thing is depending on the person. Is the deputy someone who feels himself responsible to be a representative of democracy, and then he is not on an island, he is sitting in his committees and he does hear the arguments of the others. So there are coming other arguments, and then if he spends money on engaging me, I have to help him to look if these other arguments are justified. Maybe he then decides to make other amendments to a legislative proposal if he is convinced. And the justification can definitely be scientific. So some ideas, you find some science for that, or you don't find. Or they are not justified. You see that there are just only corporate interests behind them, and then we have to find good arguments, even coming or and the best situation are based through science, that he can argue why he is not convinced, why he makes other decisions. And I think if you are willing to be a good deputy, you try to argue with facts if you are not convinced from your colleagues in some questions. And I can only help to find these arguments, but it is very important, and that's maybe the reason why some deputies call on me and some not. For me, it's really important that I'm able to say and to assess and to recommend what I think is reputable, what I think is plausible, even in every case in the question of sustainability. So that's just the line I try to follow. For me, it's very important that I'm able to say that and that I'm able to recommend some things, and then he can follow or not. But I can't work for a deputy who says, okay, write me a text in this direction. For me, not, maybe for other people, but that's for me the border. And that's maybe I discussed sometimes with some conservative politicians where got a coffee break in the cafeteria, and he asked, would you also work for me? Because traditionally I work for deputies from another party that has become this way. So I said, okay, I work for every person which has no brown color in politics. So, but my ideas in my discussing and my assessment has to be taken seriously. If you just say, write me a text in this direction, I will not do that. So that, but that depends, that is really a personal relationship between the one who calls you and your own ideas, and that might be a kind of intransparency, but that's a personal level which you find often in politics.
Yes, thank you. Some great points here. And I had a couple of thoughts that I thought I would add. And one is that we just actually discussed the idea of, we were talking about Athens air quality and electric cars. One of the things that sometimes has to come in that big perspective is, where's the electricity for those electric cars coming from? If they're coming from high sulfur coal plants, for example, you actually may not be getting the net benefit that you think you are. On the other hand, you may say it's still worth it because we improved the air quality in an area that had a high concentration of bad air. So that doesn't make one thing wrong or one thing right, but we have to look at that big picture, because it's really important to take that step back, because who's across the table or who's in that room with you may not be interested in that big picture. They may not care about the water quality downstream or the air quality in a certain area, but we'll just move it somewhere else. The second thing that really came to me that I wanted to share is that in science and the perspectives that I often get, I often hear two things that come through, and I think, again, we've discussed some of that. And some are working from the ideal perspective. You know, how do we have maximum biodiversity? How do we restore environments to what they once were? Or how do we make sure that our water is the same water that was flowing when there was no industrialization on Earth? And they want to work back to that level, and anything that doesn't reach that level is going to be a problem. And you can certainly use science to be able to measure against that high ideal standard. At the same time, we have groups that come in and say, this is the baseline level, and we just want to improve it a little bit. How can we get a little more yield out of our cornfield or out of our dairy plant? Or how do we make sure that we just save one more life with better air quality? Well, those are two very different perspectives. And you can use science, and there is science that supports both of them. So how is it that we as people who are scientifically trained and we can think in terms of science, but yet have such different perspectives coming in around the table? How do we figure out what's going to be best for the society as a whole? So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Will you also want to quickly react to that before we open?
It's just a quick answer, because always what you described is a very inconvenient situation now with people that are elected that are no time to take the good decision. Your job is a good job, but what could happen if someone less dedicated to public good would be at your place? That is a question I would like to ask. So that's why the proposal that we have in Citoyennes concerns citizen convention, because it's exactly a democratic procedure that I've been imagined to deal with complex issue like a scientific issue. When you took the example of electric car, it's exactly the good example. If you take the good decision a little bit quick with a good narrative, you will take the decision. But if you take time, because democracy take a lot of time, if you take time, if you spend the money you need to have a good democracy, then you can have some citizens without any conflict of interest, without any knowledge before coming that have been randomly selected, and those will have a new formation thanks to a plurality of expertise, and they will take time, like 1 weekend, 2 weekends, 3 weekends, to be really to have a really wide education on the specific topic, and they will take time to formulate a recommendation that could be maybe not so black and white. It will not be maybe we'll go to electric car, but maybe we will try to make that and that and that, and to have a full range of recommendation. And it's sure that when with a deputy or his assistant that has only 5 minutes to hear you about your argument, because they have no time, because you write that there are 300 issues to deal every time, it is not okay. It is not a situation we can be confident, we can be happy with.
Right, yeah, good points. I think we really should open it up now. We had already questions queuing up. I think you were first. Can you get a microphone, please? I think we can't
the gentleman's in sound, yes, and then the gentleman on his side with the, yes, you.
And please keep it brief, that others have also the chance to.
We're gonna take 2 questions and then get back to the panel.
I am very happy that I can give you the knowledge I gathered the last 20 years. I will be requiring only 1 minute. I made some connections. As a bachelor in chemistry, I learned how to search. As a master's degree in medicinal chemistry, I learned how to find answers. Then later, as a medical doctor, I decided that it is in my interest to deal only with the rehabilitation of the immune system and the metabolism and the primary health. So, since we talked about all these subjects, I will go directly to the point. I remember from the US Senate, when the expert of climate, they didn't know that CO2 in the atmosphere is 0.04%. And if it goes less than 0.03%, then the plants die. And they said then that it used to be 0.7%. So this argument about the climate and the CO2, I don't know how valid it is, and maybe if it is because of politics. Now, well, if we move forward, have we destroyed our plants and our agriculture with pesticides, and we named it a normality? Because I remember the scandal with DuPont Company and the PFAS, that is also a very nice movie about that, in dark waters, that was uploaded in the internet and then downloaded for unknown reasons. And then we also know the Erin Brockovich story, yeah? And about the hexavalent chromium. Okay, in both cases, it was one person who decided that The best thing to do is to say the truth, and whatever happens is the best thing to happen. And then about the cars that you said, there is already the technology with cars that run with water. Why we are not focusing on that? Do you know that the internal combustion engine can burn alcohol? And in the exhaust, we will have water. So this is the things that I learned. In the rehabilitation of the immune system and the metabolism, there are many hormonal disruptors. And as a chemist, I know that if you have a little bit in your bread, a little bit in your meat, a little bit in this food and the other food, it's too much. So who can safely say that is a little bit?
Thank you.
What are the politicians are doing? So thank you.
Thank you. That's a very big question for the panel. And I'm sorry,
important-
we need to move on. I'm so sorry. We have 5 minutes.
Sorry.
We have 5 minutes for everyone. Let's be democratic.
15 seconds is most important for everyone here.
Come on.
There was a scientific paper who said if vitamin D level goes more than 60 to 80 nanogram per ml and more in the blood, we can have 0 deaths. That paper was not published on time because someone decided to keep it and delay the publication. That goes in. We could have saved a lot of lives.
Thank you. Thank you so much. The next question, please, from our on the other. Yeah, not Jonathan. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Please be direct to the point.
Yeah, sure, for sure. So, I mean, this is a question for the secretary, really. So, if I understood your answer correctly, that for the most part, decisions, environmental decisions, get made because the science is pretty clear, and we have the case of organic farming where it's better for the farmers, it's better for the consumers, it's better for the rivers, it's better for the seas, it's better for the future, it's better for on every basic metric, and yet Greece does not have 100% organic farming, and nor does any other country, but some have migrated to that. So I'm wondering how to reconcile your statement and that fact.
I think next was Giuseppe. Giuseppe first, please.
Yeah, I would like to ask to the speakers to take into account a graph we've seen twice. Yesterday, 2 speakers presented a fundamental graph. In the 80s, there's been an intersection. The line of public financing for research going down and crossing the line of corporate research going up, which is now 3 times the public research financing, while it was the opposite in the 60s and 70s still. I mean, that's really changing the panorama. The amazing fact, and that's what's something I would like to have a comment, is that in the major areas we are concerned, like biotechnologies, this works on a Ponzi scheme, something we said several times in ENSSER. Namely, they do not have application or they are disastrous, but by permanent hypes, they attract money and it goes up in a Ponzi scheme. A similar situation is in AI. Not exactly, because then there are major applications in AI. For example, 500, 600 million Chinese are controlled any second of their life. Only with AI you can do that, because they scan all possible sentences and what they say, what they write. I mean, that's amazing. So that's a major application, but surely providing no profit. I mean, do we have a political answer to this?
Thank you so much. We have one online question from Siguna, and then we're going to close the questions and we're going back to the panel. We have reached our time, so we're going to do like this. We're deeply sorry that not everyone can make the questions that they want, but pretty sure that after the debate, you can just directly engage with the panel. For sure, they will stay at least for 10 more minutes here, so you can engage with them. So Siguna, can you listen to me? And can you please?
Yes. Thank you. Yes, a question for Professor Ioannidis. The problems that you described in my books stem from the data overload. As an independent scientist, most of my career, I was writing many theory and hypothesis articles, and I argue that very often I've actually been able to be somewhat ahead of the curve and even evade some of the distractions because of some flawed or fabricated data. And I just wonder if you could see a potential to support this type of research in publications, perhaps with bringing it more predominance or following up on some of the theory and hypothesis articles, or a way of holding those all the authors accountable to some of the claims that you're making. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Siguna. So who wants to go first? Should we give the word to the first speaker first? If you want to make comments on the questions that, or in the presentations you heard.
I'll make a brief comment.
Okay, thank you so much.
Since we are in the Academy of Athens, I'll finish with Plato.
Okay.
Who said science without, let's say, virtue, science without virtue is shrewdness, not wisdom.
Thank you so much.
Okay, as regard organic farming, that was a very specific question. It's not in my portfolio, but anyway, I can tell you that Greece strongly supports organic farming in terms of, political decisions. However, we have to take into account that it's not only the political decisions that form the world. It's also money. It's basically money. So when you have a more expensive product, you have to have the consumer that is willing to pay the extra money to buy the organic product. So, of course, we encourage organic farming, but that also requires that there is a customer that is going to buy the product. So at the end of the day, you have as organic farming as you can afford, and the citizen can afford, and the market can afford, and you can, with your policies, I mean, national policies, you can shift that, point of equilibrium a little bit higher up. But that's as much as you can do. No. The reason we support organic farming is because organic farming is better for the environment, but also organic farming is better for the Greek farmer, because the Greek farmer has a small land, so we cannot compete the Argentinian or the American or the French or the German or the Polish farmer. So we can compete the farmer by selling high quality products. So you have benefits from the economic side, and you have benefits from the environmental side. But you also need the market, and the market should not be underestimated. It's a more complex discussion. It's a more complex discussion because common agricultural policy is based on heavy subsidies.
Yes.
So it's a more complex discussion that we can do in 2 minutes.
Yes, no, we cannot go into that. We have had separate conferences on the issue, and I see Ulrich's theory going up, and I understand that, but it's more complex. Good, keep them up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll pass it to you now. I do it in the end.
So there were a number of questions, I think, that related to what I mentioned during my talk or during the discussion. I think that my perspective is that we should allow different perspectives and different views and different results to circulate. So not have censorship. That would include some very unlikely results that have very low priors, and perhaps they would be very easy targets to refute. But I prefer to just have them out and then just be refuted if they are to be refuted. Some of them may be very major discoveries, and science is not run by any vote counting. It may be that one is the Einstein of 2025 and knows far more than all of us. But obviously, that Einstein is going to be a very rare person. You know, most of the others who pretend to be Einsteins would probably just be idiots. So I think we have to be very careful with moving from extreme observations to policy. But different perspectives need to be represented. Now, how do we manage the literature? One of the questions was about accountability. Should we hold these people who kind of pollute the literature with faulty results accountable? I mean, should they be fired? Should they be penalized? What should happen to them? I think that there's a balance between rewards and penalties. I tend to favor more rewards for good science, for good research practices, for rigorous approaches to scientific investigation, to reproducible research, to making research more trustworthy, to being a good science citizen, rather than penalizing. Although some penalties, of course, have to be in place for some egregious behaviors. I think that also needs to be studied to see which processes are getting us the best outcomes. I just fear that if we focus too much on penalizing, I was the one who bombarded you for 30 minutes with so many negative messages. I don't want you to conclude, let's go out and hang them because they're making so many mistakes. We need to understand that science is very difficult. It is error prone, it is mistake prone. I consider myself a champion of mistakes. I make a lot of mistakes. That's my definition of trying to be a scientist, but hopefully try to correct them. Now, policymakers also should understand that science is making a lot of mistakes. And when they're approached by people who are very self-confident, and I think most politicians are approached by that type of people because there are scientists who want to have kind of a power profile and boost themselves and appear, well, of course, be a little bit suspect about this type of phenotype and seek someone who has more uncertainty, is low-key, more humble, says more often, I do not know, I would like to check this out. Well, they might say, I also want $1 billion to check this out, but be attracted to people who say, I do not know, and I'll try to give you a very cautious and nuanced answer rather than someone who says, I'm the one, and can I be the president of the panel, committee, advisory, whatever.
Thanks. Just one sentence to the organic farming more. If you make true cost accounting, the costs for society at the end are much more higher when you introduce conventional farming than organic. That is, in the end, the costs are much higher for all these damages which are done. I think there is that we have enough science on that. The other question, why do we have so much company-paid research, I would say shortly. I think Aude has described that. If we build our research funds of the EU on two pillars calling competitive competition and security, which means a very narrow idea of security, not food security, for example, not in an agroecological idea, then you have not to wonder that the money and the funds go into techno fixes. And I think we have to keep in mind that when we have to deal with solutions for our problems, we have to put more public money in research which looks on processes as on developing technical solutions, which can be sold as a product on the market. But I don't know if there is such a high awareness on that. So I think many people don't know that a lot of the risk research which is done in Europe nowadays comes from NGOs, and that is totally not their work they have to do. That they are not in response to that. It should be the government to put money in free research on risk assessment or on developing a sustainable process or something like that. And I think we have to raise this question louder, I think, even as ENSSER. I think that is a very important thing. Thanks.
So I heard a couple of really interesting things, and one really stood out that I wanted to share, as it was just observations that really just came out of the discussion we just had. And that was talking about, and this is about the need to kind of synthesize, and when sharing with decision makers, how to look at that big picture. Well, we just discussed the increase in where funds for research are coming from and the role of the private sector. But we also heard in the presentation from Dr. Ioannis about how 1 out of every 7 papers has to be retracted. So you have to look at, if we're getting all of this extra money into research, and if that extra money is coming from private sector or industrial-based research, but yet we've had a huge increase in the number of papers that are having to be pulled back, is there a relation there? What do we as decision makers and people looking at science have to be thinking about in terms of where that data is coming from and how we're going to use that to help us make better decisions? And I think that that's one of the things that is really important for us as policymakers, as informers of policymakers, and as scientists, is again to try to look at where are those connections, what part of the picture are we missing? How are there areas where there's that Venn diagram overlap of data that we can use to help inform? And really to summarize it all, it reminds me of a saying that we'll often hear about in just, I guess, in common knowledge when it comes to science and statistics. And that is that statistics never lie, but they'll say anything you want them to.
So just my final word will be that I think that with the conference you had a very good overview of what is the system of science nowadays. I think that if you look at the general political context in all over the world with the threat of far right and with what is happening in the US and so on, I think that we cannot be satisfied with business as usual. And so we have to join and to claim that democracy should be taken seriously, including in the science and technological field that is too many times excluded for the democratic debates.
Thank you so much. Ευχαριστώ. Neni, τελευταία λόγια. Neni.
Yes. Just to say, no, thank you. I'm here. Everybody can see me. Okay, just to say thank you very, very much for coming to this conference. I am sure that you all understood it's not a conventional conference. It's a conference where has, let's say, projections to philosophy and to our personal beliefs, to each personal beliefs. I think a discussion has opened now, is open, because we were talking about science. All of us in here have some connection with science, and we have been funded, we have been working, we have been competitive, but we never sat down and think, what is this science that we're producing is doing to the general public, to ourselves, to the planet, to the human being in generally. So I just want to thank you all for being here. All, yes. I cannot see.
Come here,
All,
come here.
all. I think it was well balanced and chosen, this round table discussion. And I think that everybody is taking something back. I will stay in the words of Professor Chrousos, who said that it's a matter of philosophical approach, what we're doing. And of course, let's not translate it always to numbers and money, but let's translate it to the philosophical approach of what do we gain and where do we go and how do we, let's say, educate ourselves in all levels. So thank you again. And we have lunch, and then we have the AGM at 3 o'clock. So we will be back again in this room. And have a nice trip back, whoever traveled. And we really thank you. Thank you. I thank you all. Thank you. Thank you.
If you allow me to disrupt for 1 second, I would also like a huge applause to Lucas, Amela, Sanjay, and Diedrich. And all the technical staff whose names I don't know. And a huge thank you to the Academy of Athens for having us here, for hosting us here, and to the Mariolopoulos Foundation for giving us the conditions and support to also organize this amazing debate. Thank you so much. Thank you all.